me just like
We're back on the Morning Brew with friends, and I love this. We got our old friend Gary Schoeniger in with us this morning. It's been a while since you've been on. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's great to
Gary
be here.
is the author of Who Owns the Ice House, one of the greatest books on basically the entrepreneurial way.
Entrepreneurial thinking.
Entrepreneurial thinking.
Yep.
And it's great to have you back, and you're in town promoting the Train the Trainer event.
Yes.
And you guys are trying to really grow this thing this year, right, Gary?
Yep. That's right.
It's like both Garys here, so. Oppedahl.
Yes. Right, and so the mayor took a lead and said, let's train 100 of our city employees in how to
do what?
Passionately pursue your goals despite current obstacles and resources. You know, we all talk about cutbacks and we all say, oh, woe is me. But the last thing you want is, well, if you give me $1 million, I'll go start a soup kitchen. No, it's what can I do now with what I've got? And that's how entrepreneurs think.
Right.
And it's not about starting businesses. Right. It's about solving problems. Every situation you face, there's an opportunity for an upgrade. Let's find it. And that's how entrepreneurs think. And that's what Gary's...
So why do you think people see themselves as trapped in a little box then? You know, because I think it's very easy for a lot of us who are in the working world to say, well, I'm trapped here and I got to get 17 layers of management approval to do anything. And I mean, does it have to be a top-down thing or can it be a ground-up thing?
I think it can be both. You know, but to your other question, Dan, you know, why do people feel trapped, right? Because they've never been taught to think like an entrepreneur. Right? We're so dependent on somebody else to provide a job, somebody else to tell us what to do. Somebody else is going to figure out what's useful. And most of us have just never developed the skills of figuring out what is useful. So when you think of, you know, the basic premise of an entrepreneurial mindset is the idea that I can empower myself
to go do whatever I want
by solving problems for other people.
And this doesn't have to be necessarily in your work life. It doesn't have to be starting a business. It can be something like starting a soup kitchen. It can be something like writing that book you've always wanted to write. It can be whatever, right?
I mean, the core notion, Dan, is the idea that it's up to us to make ourselves useful to others. Right? Once we sort of embrace that idea, like no one else is going to tell me what's useful, I'm going to figure out what's useful. That core thought sends one on an entrepreneurial path. What do I care about? What do I like to do? What problems do I want to solve? I mean, that's it. How
do you recognize those? I think that's one of the grand things. I was just talking to a friend of mine who's trying to relaunch his business this weekend, you know?
Yeah.
And he was like, is there a problem here? Is there, you know, it's a coffee business and he's trying to figure out how to get it started again.
Yeah.
He's like, there's a bunch of coffee. How do I make mine better, different? What am I trying to solve, you know?
Right.
And even though he had this business before, he's still struggling with it. And how do you find somebody like that or tell somebody like that, this is your problem that you're solving. This is where you're going.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Dan. And a lot of people fail because they set out with a solution in search of the problem.
And that might be this guy's.
And what entrepreneurs learn to do, usually after a few failures, is find the problem first.
Right.
And really understand the problem from others' point of view. And then you're prepared to solve it. You know, when a doctor prescribes before he diagnoses, he gets sued for malpractice.
Right. Don't do that in your business.
And perhaps that's what your friend is doing. He's diagnosing.
He's saying people want this coffee.
He's prescribing without diagnosing.
Right. Rather than saying what kind of coffee is actually needed on the shelves, you're trying to push out coffee that no one needs.
That's it. That's it. I have this conversation often. I literally met with a couple, corporate, burned out on corporate. You know, they want to open a coffee shop. And I'm pointing out to them, like, I can see from where we're sitting a Starbucks, and down the road is a Dunkin' Donuts.
Right.
So what evidence do you have that you're solving a problem for people in the community?
Right.
Your thinking is upside down.
Right.
You're trying to solve a problem for yourself.
Right.
You hate your job.
You hate your job. Coffee shop sounds romantic.
Right. Exactly.
Right. I would love to open up that little corner bar somewhere. But there's a bunch of those right now.
Correct. So, but when you flip it, like, look, the world's full of problems.
Right.
Pick one. Like, I spoke at South by Southwest EDU conference a couple weeks ago, and a friend of mine who's on a panel from Mexico, from the prestigious University of Mexico, Tecnológico de Monterrey, he said, don't fall in love with your solution, fall in love with the problem.
Right.
And that's like a good way of understanding the thinking.
I think this gets back to that EPA thing, for example, we were talking about in headlines. You know, there's that big EPA spill, and there was some mine tailings that got into some rivers around here in the northern part of the state. And should entrepreneurs be looking at that as an opportunity to solve that problem? Is that the kind of thing we should look at, those kinds of big problems, or are there simpler, other smaller, easier problems we can fix?
You know, my problem is I see problems everywhere and I go into solution mode. It's like now the problem becomes like turn it off and focus on one or two. But to your point, and I think it's correct, it's just, you know, people say, oh, okay, I want to cure cancer. All right, you know, what can you do today?
Right.
What processes, what problems, what frustrations, what unmet needs are you encountering in your daily life?
There's a lot.
And you're right, there's a lot. But you know, you're getting to a more fundamental question, right? So are you complaining about problems?
Or are you doing something about them?
Right, and that's sort of really what, you know, once you start the mental exercise of, why are we doing it this way? This doesn't make any sense. What if we did it
in a different way? So now take this into the train the trainer side of things. And how do you train people to start thinking like that? Where do you take somebody from who's just like that struggling, floundering kind of person, and how do you train them to think about these things as problems and solutions?
So that's a really good question also, Dan, is first of all, making people aware of entrepreneurship is so much more than the Mark Zuckerberg, Richard Branson, you know, Bill Gates story.
Right.
There's everyday entrepreneurs, millions of them doing it every day in their lives.
Right, creating jobs all across the country.
Creating jobs, ordinary people doing remarkable things. So you need to point out, like, what the process actually looks like. So then people say, oh, I'm capable of that, right?
Is it just like a 3-step process or a 20-step process? Is it the kind of thing
It's not like that at all, Dan, but it starts with the core assumption that every problem, frustration, unmet need you encounter is a potential opportunity. So the thinking shifts, and then you start learning on your own. You begin to observe your broader environment. You experiment. We teach people to micro-experiment. It's not go to the bank and get $100,000 and mortgage your home and hope to God it works.
Let's try a $100 thing here or a $100 thing there.
Let's try a $50 experiment on Sunday morning with a few friends and see what happens.
Great. So where can people go to get trained?
So the training tonight is at the Convention Center.
Ballroom A, 6 o'clock.
Yep.
There's
Free?
a community free event to talk about all of these concepts.
We love it. We love having you back on the show.
Thank you, Dan.
Come back next year again?
It's great to be here. Love it.
We'll see you then.
Cool stuff happening in Albuquerque.
Awesome. We'll be back in a couple of minutes on the Morning Brew with Friends.